can I show to you that Jesus is a pointless answer? All right. Now we're going to do that by using this wonderful passage. And we did a quiz earlier, and nobody in my quiz guessed that miracle. So it came up as a pointless answer, this miracle. But it's one of my favourites because of the drama. Now, admittedly, with the most popular answer was the one, water into wine. Everyone said that first. And admittedly, when you turn 7 barrels of water into 1,500 bottles of the finest red wine, that's a fairly impressive miracle. And as someone that likes a nice glass of Rioja, I'm quite impressed with it. But I like this one better because of the drama of where we are. So let's look at what's happened. Jesus is still early in his ministry, okay? So because John the Baptist is still around, so we know that. Now he'd left Jordan to go back up to the area of Nazareth, but he didn't base himself in Nazareth. Now Nazareth, as we saw in the clip earlier, is quite near Nain, but it's actually up in the mountains. It's more of a mountain hamlet than a town. So Jesus based himself in a place called Capernaum, Capernaum, the village of Nahum. That's where the word comes from. It's a fishing town. It's fairly cosmopolitan. I don't think Jesus really liked the town much, but it was a good place to be based, and it's where Andrew and Peter, his first disciples, came from. And he had this itinerant ministry. That means he'd be going out and about, walking to towns, sharing the good news, preaching the gospel to the poor. I said, well, what would that be like, actually following Jesus around in a modern context? Does anyone know the Irish singer Daniel O'Donnell? Yeah, a few people know that. He's a very famous Irish singer. I saw a documentary on him once, and I was fascinated because there were people, say like a group of ladies from Burnley, say, who would follow him around the world. And they would spend, one day they would be in Austria, then they might be in Italy, and then a week later they'd be planning to go off to Canada. And it was like, wow, really committed to going and see Daniel O'Donnell. And I think it was a bit like that with Jesus. I'm not saying he was a good country singer, but he was someone that you wanted to be around and see what he was going to do next. Now, I imagine at a Daniel O'Donnell concert, you pretty much know, if you're following him around like that, you know all the songs, and one set will be much like the next. But following Jesus around, you never knew what he was going to do next. And I think I would have been there, okay, I'll work up some toil, take some time off work, and we'll follow Jesus around for a few days and see what's going to happen. So he's on one of his trips, and he's walking from Capernaum to a town called Nain. Now it's about 25 miles. So if you've had your breakfast, right, and you've got a crowd following you, you're going to arrive there late afternoon, probably about dusk. At that time of year, out there, but about dusk he would arrive there. So he has a long walk, and he's arriving at Nain. Now, dusk is the time when they have your funerals. It's that time of day when, if there's a funeral going to happen, it was going to happen then. So this is part of the magic of how all these things come together. Now, it says that this happened at the gates of Nain. Now, there weren't actually any physical gates around the village. We know that from archaeology. But it was used as a sort of meeting place. The word gate can mean the entrance to a town. And it's where people would have come and shared their business and debated things. And that might have been where Jesus was heading for, the gate area of Nain. Now imagine you're at the gate doing a bit of business, all right? And then you can hear this noise coming from in the town. And then you remember, oh yeah, it's that lady who's lost her husband last year. Her son's just died. I forgot about that. I was going to go to that funeral, but I just forgot about it. And you're there doing your business. And the noise is getting louder because there's a big crowd of people there. Now, in Jewish law, even if you were the poorest of the poor, you still had to hire the minimum of 2 flutists for some mournful fluting and 1 wailer. All right? So you'd have they're your professional mourners. So you've got some professional mourners, but because of the tragedy of this situation of this lady having lost both her husband and her son, there's a big crowd coming towards her, and the woman's at the front. With the other women, and then there's the bier. It says in the Bible a coffin, but it is more like a sort of a stretcher with a wrapped up body on it. And in those days, you often used to show the face, the shroud. The face would be clear on the shroud. And it reminded me of an incident I had in Charlton Kings, actually, because Jim Keegan, who some of you know, rang me up one day and said, "Oh, I've got a little job for you, Kevin, little job for you. Can you meet me down the church graveyard?" So I meet him down the church graveyard, and he's there. He's got this big stump of a tree that they've given him to do some wood carving with, great big wide trunk, it was stumped, it was too heavy to carry one person, so he wanted me to help him to carry it into the van. And he brought this stretcher along. So he put the stretcher down, and we moved this big stump onto the stretcher. It was all covered in bits of mud and ivy, so we put a blanket over it to not get the van muddy. And it was about dusk, so it was getting a bit misty as well. And his Morris van was parked out on the side, just around by the forge. So we're carrying this stump out. And as we get out through the gates of the church, I see a person by the forge looking at us, aghast. And as we sort of move this stretcher from the graveyard into the back of the van, you know. Unfortunately, he must have thought, oh, well, my ancestors aren't buried there, so I'll let it go, I won't ring the police. But it was a bit like that. It was that sort of get up they had there. So you've got this coming towards the meeting place, and then from a distance as well, on this narrow road, there's another commotion coming in the opposite direction. And there's this rabbi, this teacher, that's becoming quite popular now, quite famous, with a whole lot of sort of disciples around him, and then perhaps another 200 people, and it's stretching back perhaps a quarter of a mile down this road. And they're converging, these two sort of noises converging on your meeting place. So what happens? Jesus at the front of his entourage comes face to face with the woman, and he immediately understands the hopelessness and pointlessness of what's happened, of this lady's situation. You know, in Jewish in those times, there was no social security. So she lost her husband. So what you would normally do as a widow is you would then have lived with one of your children, and you would have them around the house, and they would look after you. If you haven't, then you're really onto the mercy of the community. But not only that, you know, that her family line would come to an end. And it's not so important for us today that our surnames get carried on, but in Jewish tradition it was. You know, that's the end of the family line. You could probably trace it back to Abraham. My son's died with no children, and that's the end of my family line. And this was a desperate time for this lady. And Jesus can sense that, and he tells us, as it does on so many occasions, that he's filled with compassion. But he goes up to the lady and he just says what we all would: don't worry about it, just don't worry. And then he goes up to the coffin, to the bier, lays his hand on it. And at that point, it's, you know, if you're one of the sort of stretcher bearers, you stop, they stopped. I can imagine the sort of mournful flutes sort of die down and everything goes quiet. You know. First of all, he's not supposed to be touching a dead person, because again, that's the Jewish laws. Just like we looked at the Samaritan lady with the pot at the well, wasn't supposed to be touching that, having her drinks. He's not supposed to be doing that. It's against the law, but Jesus doesn't care. There's a greater purpose. There's a greater purpose here. So he touches it and he says to the man, stand up, sit up, get up, come on, get up. And we saw how he responds. He gets up and he speaks, so the crowd know instantly that he's okay. And then he gives the son back to the mother. He makes a point of saying, look, here's your mother, to it. Now, we see this at first glance as a wonderful miracle, don't we? It's Jesus being compassionate, yeah? And it's easy to move on there, but in John, he often refers to the miracles as signs. So what if it's a sign, then what is it a sign to? Now, in that area, they would have been well aware, as Jewish people, of what happened with Elijah. What we looked at this reading earlier, where Elijah had gone into to the widow, he'd called on God, and he prayed over the boy, and he restored the widow's only dead son to her. And as I said earlier, Elijah became the sort of hero of the faith, and that story was a story that had been passed down the generations, and everyone would have known about. And one commentary told me that actually where it happened was only a few miles from Nain, so sort of almost in Elijah territory, really. So when they saw Jesus do this, the first thing they would have thought of, as well as being afraid and astonished, was, whoa, Elijah, this is Elijah. Or this is at least the spirit of Elijah coming back. Now Elisha was almost like Elijah part 2, if you like, because God said to Elijah, before you go, find Elisha and bless him, and he'll take on your spirit. And he did the same sort of miracles as Elijah did, and everyone knew, oh, this is the spirit of Elijah in Elisha. But that was the only Old Testament examples of resurrections. So when Jesus came up to the woman, nobody, I don't think, would have expected what was about to happen. And he walked in there as a great teacher, but he walked out as, they're calling it, a great prophet. You know, this is a great prophet is in our midst. This isn't just a rabbi, a teacher, someone that's been hanging out with John the Baptist. This is a great prophet. And this is where the turning point came at this moment in Nain. And you can see the similarities, can't you, with Elijah and with Jesus. But there are differences as well. The differences were that Elijah had to call on God, didn't he? He said, God, please heal this boy. Whereas Jesus just spoke to the boy. The power, it was in Jesus. The power of God was in Jesus, and he spoke, and the boy got up. It's because he wasn't just a great prophet, of course. He was the Son of God. And now the people of Nain wouldn't have appreciated that, but they did know that something really special was happening. Was anybody alive in 1947? Yeah, a few of you. Anyone know what happened in 47? Some big biblical discovery? Dead Sea Scrolls, yeah, Qumran, that's right. What the Dead Sea Scrolls tells a lot about first century Jews. And they were expecting, at that time, they were expecting the Messiah to come. It was a very expectant society. They were expecting the return of Elijah. And this was what was in their mindset at the time. We know that. And Jesus came in to that mindset, into that area, and did this miracle, which people would have said, wow, this is a great man, this is a great prophet. He's got the spirit of Elijah on him. So that was the sign, and that's the miracle. Okay? And that's the point of it, really. That's the point of the miracle. And that's the sign to the people then. So the question is, what does that mean to us today, isn't it? I mean, we've looked at what it meant to the people then, but what is that today? You know? What's that miracle about in our setting, in my setting? But Jesus said that he was the resurrection and the life. Yeah? We know that, don't we? Who was that miracle for? In Nain, who was the miracle for? It was the resurrection of the Son. But who really had their life given back to them? Who was resurrected? It was the widow. It was her life, because she was about to go into what she would have perceived as a pointless existence, a hopeless situation. And Jesus came into that situation and gave her back her life. He resurrected her life. It was nice for a chap, wasn't it? He died, he's got another chance. But it was about the compassion to the woman. It was about resurrecting and giving her life. Now, there was no physical healing, was there, for her? But you can see how she got new life. And for us, we can be, in our life, in areas and situations which are hopeless, can seem pointless, can't they? Some of you have had the misfortune of losing children. Others of you have had serious illnesses to cope with. There are times when you feel you've been totally abandoned. There are times when you're just stressed with work, where your family have caused you all sorts of problems. People in the church have caused you all sorts of problems. Your best friends that you've known for years have turned against you. That happens, isn't it? And we get to the point where we feel life is desperate. And there are many people living in our communities that feel that life has now become pointless. Now, if I did a survey and said, what is the answer to that situation, what do you think the popular answer would be out in society? If you're really desperate, what do people do? Do they turn to Jesus? No. That's not the popular answer, is it? What are the popular answers? Money, drink, booze. People booze themselves up. They're taking drugs. They might go out on a spending spree, think that might help, might commit suicide. These are some of the answers, aren't they? That people put into a situation that is hopeless. But the pointless answer, the answer to when life seems pointless, is Jesus. Isn't it? Yeah? It is Jesus. And how do you then get from that pointless, hopeless situation to being freed from that? If Jesus is the answer, how can that impact our lives? And there are many things that you can do as Christians to get that impact of Jesus into your life. But I think one of them is just by being angry with God and just getting it out there, isn't it? Sometimes you've got to get a place, perhaps if you're able-bodied, get up on the hill and just shout to God and get out of there. You're angry, this is not fair, why has this happened to you? Or it might be find a quiet room when no one else is in the house and just sob your heart out to him and say, look, I just don't understand why this has happened, and really push it out, yeah? And then in that situation, when you're exhausted, when you've been angry with God often comes into that. And it's not that God's forgotten you're there. Thinks, what's all that noise? Oh, it's Kevin, he's having a hard time. I've forgotten about him. It's not that. It's that sometimes we've got these layers on our heart, and we just need to get it open. We just need to be honest with God and get it out there. Some people have said to me, well, you shouldn't get angry with God because that's like grieving the Spirit. That's like an unforgivable sin. That's just poppycock, you know. We need to be honest with God. If we're hurting, we need to get that out there. Elijah's a really interesting character. It's worth following the rest of his story, because when he did go back and tell Ahab it was going to rain, it's going to rain now, and he had this big thing where he challenged Baal and all these prophets that Jezebel had brought in. They were all killed as Israel turned against them. And the mighty acts of God, and Elijah must have thought, everyone's going to be fine now. Jezebel is going to turn to God, everything's going to be fine. What was Jezebel's response? What's happened to all my prophets of Baal? Right, I'm going to get at you, Elijah. I'm going to kill you. And Elijah, then he reached another desperate point. And God took him up onto another area where he'd run away to, another mountain area. And he said, right, go up onto that mountain. And then there's a famous passage where there's this mighty wind, and then there's this earthquake, and then there's this fire comes down, and Elijah goes through all that, and then there's a quiet whisper, and God's there in that presence, you know. And when we're in that awkward, pointless, hopeless situation, sometimes we've got to go through that earthquake, wind, and fire, and you get it all out there, and it might take some time to do that, and then comes that whisper of God, and then that presence of God, yeah. And there's nothing better than God coming and speaking to you, feeling you in his presence. And what happens in that situation is that life, God will, you will start seeing the way forward. You'll start seeing the next step forward. For Elijah, what God did to him in that small point, he said, right, what I want you to do now is you've got to go and appoint Hazael to be king of Sidon. You've got to go and appoint Jehu, because I'm going to get rid of Ahab. He's going to be the new king of Israel. I want you to go and find this guy called Elisha, because he's going to take over from you. So from being in a hopeless and pointless situation, Elijah now has a new mission, doesn't he? He now has some point to his life, some hopefulness to his life. And that's really what I want to say today, is that the pointless answer, okay, when you're in a desperate, pointless situation, when you don't know where to go next, who's the answer? Jesus. Yeah? Jesus is the answer. Okay? It's sometimes hard to get to the point where he can speak back into your life and give you new hope. But that's the battle we need to get to, because he is the answer to those desperate situations. Amen. Okay. So we'll just pray. Lord, I thank you that whatever situation we come into, no matter how hard our future seems and our present seems, that there is hope. That you are the Lord of hope. And that, Lord, there is a place where we can meet with you, we can work through and find you, and we can feel your touch and feel your word. It might be a word from fellow Christians, from family friends that speak your word into our lives. It may be a word that you just speak softly into our hearts, so we just know what the next step is. But I just ask for anybody here, anyone in our fellowship that's going through a really hard time, Lord, that you will help them find that place where they can meet with you, that place of peace where you can speak into their heart and show them the next step forward. We ask that in the power of your name, Lord Jesus. Amen.